So, hang on a second. So, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time to join our session. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a former primary school teacher, and 20 years ago, when I had my first child, I founded Educating Matters to support the well-being of employees with a special focus on parents and carers. And we work with a really broad range of organisations globally, addressing topics like educating and raising children, integrating work and family, neurodiversity, LGBTQ+, allyship, and also mental health and well-being. And of course, this past year has added tremendous stress and anxiety to our lives, but it may, I'm really hoping, ultimately result in more awareness around the importance of mental health. And I feel, in a sense, that this year has humanized us at work. And when you ask someone, how are you? Rather than just saying, fine, busy, people tend to be more open about how they're really doing and actually answer that question. And it feels more vital than ever to create a culture in the workplace where we feel comfortable to discuss mental health challenges with our colleagues and reduce any stigma. So, having been through a global pandemic, we've all had struggles and a loss of safety and a bit of stress and anxiety and feeling drained and motivated. And just to share the poll results with you, we can see, oh, that's interesting that family and friend worries have come out at the top, followed by mental health. And I actually just wanted to ask you another poll question, which is just around, do you feel it's become easier to talk more openly about your mental health over the course of the last year? And do you feel supported by your place of work? So I wanted to have an opportunity, because it's Mental Health Awareness Week, to bring together some very perspectives on this crucial topic. So I brought some amazing guests to join me in my panel. And can I ask each of you to introduce yourself? So I'll just go in order of how you appear. So Sherry, can you tell everyone about yourself?
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Hughes. I'm the UK Diversity and Inclusion Director at PageGroup. If you don't know PageGroup, we're a global recruitment firm. I've been there a really long time. I've been there 18 years, but moved over from being a recruiter and managing teams into the diversity and inclusion team 6.5 years ago, which is roughly about the time I met Rachel. So Rachel and I have worked together for her to support all of our parents and carers within the business. So we focus on multiple strand activity, but of course there is an enormous amount of crossover, and it won't surprise anybody that mental health and well-being has very much been top of our agenda for most certainly the last 12 months, that's for sure. So it'll be great to see how this conversation flows. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Gwen?
Hi, everybody. I'm Gwendolyn Jones. I started off my career as with bachelor's degree in psychology, and then I went into teaching, working in special education, working with children with severe emotional behavior disorders and emotional disturbances. Not my words to use, but those are the categories that they were placed in. And after 9 years of working full-time as a teacher in the US and in the UK, I decided that what I actually really loved was working with families and working with the behavior side of things. So I retrained as a relationship therapist, a parenting coach, and I met the amazing Rachel Vecht, 7 years ago now, 6-7 years ago. And I've been working with Educating Matters ever since, working in the corporate space, finding ways to help you understand your child's neurodiversity and also how your own personal well-being can be affected in positive and negative ways, and supported also in the workplace. And have trained, and now I'm about to be an official occupational psychologist because I really, Rachel's really opened up this world for me to understand well-being in the workplace and just how amazing it is for people to be supported by the places where they spend most of their time. And so I'm here in that capacity as a mental health expert.
Thank you. And Janet?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me, Rachel. It's great to be here today. My job title is Director of Happiness. Now,
that's why you're on the call.
Yeah, it is. Everybody I speak to can't help but laugh, and it's taken me a good couple of years in fact, now I can't do it without smiling. I can't talk about my job title. My background is actually finance, and I've been a finance manager, well, all my adult life. And then in 2018, I got the opportunity to become Director of Happiness. I've been with the Timson Group now since 2004, so yeah, just short of 17 years now. Every moment of that's been fabulous. But my job is all about supporting colleagues, making sure we retain our excellent colleagues, sorting out benefits for them, and generally looking after every need to give them the freedom to be happy at work, because a happy colleague is a very productive colleague. And I enjoy every minute of every day, and no 2 days are ever the same. But that's because it's very people focused, and we're all very unique and very special and very different.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
all of our roles are really people focused. All 5 of us. Elliot, let's have you next. Well,
Hi,
last.
morning, last but not least, hopefully. Morning, everyone. And Janet, that's an amazing job title. It made me smile. It made me happy just hearing the job title. So that's a good start. Hi, everyone. My name is Elliot Ray, and I'm with the head of diversity inclusion at the Treasury until next Friday. And after next Friday, I'm going it alone to do the other thing, my other job is the founder of a platform called Music Football Fatherhood, which is a parenting and lifestyle platform for men. So we work with men and dads at all stages of their parenting journey. We have a blog that has hundreds of resources for dads. We have a podcast, and we do community events, and we're soon to be launching peer sessions for expectant and new dads. So really interested in mental health is a thread that runs across all our work. And I'm really, really interested in how we engage men in conversations and how we support men around mental health and well-being.
Great, thank you. So this is kind of what I thought, but look at these poll results. That is great news. So what is it? 85% of people feel it's been easier to talk about them. I mean, there's got to be some upsides to this crazy year that we've had. But what I would say is let's hold on to that, and let's not, everyone's talking about going back to normal. I don't really want to go back to exactly how it was. So let's continue to try and have that space and opportunity to really, discuss when we're facing challenges. So now I'm going to come to each of you and ask you different questions. I'm doing this panel in a different way to normal. So I'd like to start with Gwen. And Gwen, drawing on your experience over the past year in your clinic work with individuals and in your work supporting literally thousands of employees through Educating Matters, what do you think are the long-term effects of COVID on mental health and the implications for both the workplace and for those of us who are parents on our children? I know it's a massive topic.
Yeah, that's just a little question, right?
All day. But just share with us some highlights and observations.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a big question, but I think it's one that needs to be addressed, and we need to find a way to make it kind of a succinct answer. And, this past year, we've kind of been in survival mode. And now that the world has experienced this shared trauma, and we experience this state for longer than our brains are kind of really designed to, the need to be hypervigilant is kind of easing off a little bit. So what happens after we experience trauma? Well, now we have to cope with the effects of it, and now we get to process it, and now we get to learn from it. So before I talk about the specifics, I just want to reframe mental health a little bit, because the thing is, people often associate the term mental health with like mental illness. Now, that is part of it, and it's an important part of it that needs to be addressed and focused on. But mental health itself is something that we all experience at all times, just like our physical health. In fact, the World Health Organization calls it a state of being, and it describes how well we're able to kind of cope with everyday stresses. So think of it more like thought health or like brain health. And we've had a lot this year that would stress our thought health and our brain health, right? So we've got financial and job insecurity for many, the removal of access to our wider tribe on that in-person level. We've got grief and loss for everything from small things like canceled celebrations to being unable to attend funerals of loved ones and coping with the loss of them without our tribe. And then for those of us parents out there, home education whilst working has been an experience for us and for our children, and so much more. And more importantly, we've been told that we're not safe. And the truth is that we kind of weren't a little bit. And we also had to manage that message for our children as best we could. And that's a lot of stress to put on people. And then think about our children, man, they've been champions this year. In fact, I really think that they need a Thursday night clap on the doorstep. Because when I was a kid, if you canceled my dance class on a Thursday night, I was just like, oh, it's tragedy. It's the end of the world. And I can't imagine being asked to cope with this level of uncertainty, the level of insecurity. Everything has changed so much for them. And in the therapy world, we're starting to really see this wave of a mental health crisis that's coming through. Because for adults, we've seen a rise in things like depression and anxiety and relationships. As a relationship therapist, I've relationships that have broken down because the cracks that may have been able to heal in typical circumstances couldn't really cope with the strain of constantly sharing the space and not having that feeling of privacy and the space to be able to cope with things, or not being able to share a space at all. And unhealthy coping mechanisms like addictions and compulsive behaviors have increased, and anxieties over returning to work and the commute and sharing close quarters, and the fact that we're staying at home, but then maybe we kind of like staying at home, and I don't know if I really want to go back to work. This sense of kind of unhappiness and stress. And then think about our children. They've been deprived of their friends. Our younger ones' brains are designed to learn through play, and teachers have done an amazing job. So first and foremost, shout out to them, because they've really tried to help parents create that space for students in their home. But we all know that for most children, it's no replacement for the school environment, where children learn through facilitated interaction with each other as much as from the direct instruction from their teachers. And then our neurodivergent children and neurodivergent adults, we're not a big fan of change. We like it, as a neurodivergent individual myself, I kind of like things to be put in place and understand what's going on. And for our children, they've not had access to the support that they have at school. And then our older children, they've been asked to cope with this level of information that overwhelms adult brains, but they still have to deal with it. And then exams canceled, and placements at new schools are not predictable. And by the way, you've got to facilitate your own learning, and the teachers aren't in the room. I mean, it's a lot, right?
You're making me obsessed remembering it all.
I know. Yeah, but you know what? I mean, here's the thing about all this is I want to talk about resilience, because I like the definition of resilience that calls it bounce back ability. And children and adults have the ability to bounce back at varying degrees. We're starting to bounce back already. And I mean, think about how many of us have sat outside on windy, rainy days just to be able to share space with our friends at a pub again. There's no way you would have gotten me out there in that weather before, but man, we packed our blankets and we went just because we wanted to see each other. And think of the joy that you get to feel about the kind of reuniting again. And can we talk about the skills our children have started to learn that otherwise they certainly wouldn't have learned at this level? Adaptability to new situations, an appreciation for self-led learning, compassion for the wider community. And we know that developing these skills happens, but the depth of emotional intelligence our children will have as a result of this has really been accelerated. And then there's positives to come out of this experience as well. I mean, for one thing, I enjoy loungewear on a level that I never thought I would before. And my children have never been so excited to go to school. And it makes me kind of reflect on the greater beauty of the values of gratitude and appreciation. I mean, we're really appreciating all the people out there who support our world and understanding how we're connected. Frontline workers, teachers, nurses, the delivery drivers, good Lord, thank you for them. Retail workers, and also the time that we spend with each other isn't taken for granted. And working parents have gotten a real look into their children's lives, and children get to see what their parents do all day. And so we're starting to have this appreciation for each other's existence and how it relates to us. And then the other area that's come out of this is a greater awareness of mental health. I mean, most of the stressors that people are experiencing right now, they're not new. They didn't come with COVID. People have been experiencing stress over job security, stress over relationships, stress over all these things long before COVID. But it's just that the entire world has had to think about the impacts of the same thing at the same time. And it's created this kind of renaissance in the world of well-being, where it's a top priority in businesses and in schools and in homes. So rather than waiting to address when somebody's failing, it's kind of like before, we always throw a life preserver to somebody who's fallen off the boat, right? And they're drowning in the ocean. We're going to throw them a life preserver. But instead of just preparing for these accidents, we're trying to make sure that people don't fall off the boat to begin with. Mm-hmm. And we have a real opportunity to hear just a real opportunity to take a giant cultural leap to acknowledging the health of our brains and our feelings, and our ability to cope is just as important as our physical health. And I, for one, feel very, very honored to be a part of this process. So thank you for asking me that question. I hope it answered it. I know I can.
Well, that's an amazing answer, because I went feeling like that. So really great. I've just been on a roller coaster of emotions myself. So thank you.
Well, welcome to my world, Rachel.
Anyone wants to kind of share any thoughts in the chat, anything that resonates, do that. So Sherry, you and I have worked together for quite a number of years now to support parents at Page, and I know that you put huge effort into supporting all the various employee networks that you have at Page Group. So with your, in terms of what you've seen, especially over the last year, have you seen an increase in mental health challenges amongst colleagues? And how, just generally, because of what's happened during the pandemic, how do you think that's going to affect your diversity and inclusion strategy moving forward, the provision of support, and this kind of easing out of lockdown back to a more familiar life?
Okay, you ready? Buckle up. I think we've been looking at mental health and the well-being of our people properly with a strategy since 2016. So it wasn't like we suddenly went, oh my goodness, we're in a global pandemic, we're going to see some ups and downs, we need to act on it. It's like, actually, we've already started to build a culture of openness. We had a lot of work to do, but we were breaking down barriers of stigma and so on. And we have had mental health champions for a long time. We have always done a lot of storytelling. We've really tried to make it okay to not be okay. I think a lot of people have done the same thing. So, I feel like we were in a reasonably good position to ask. So one of the first things we did when we were all sent home last March, was how are you? What do you need? How's your well-being? Because we've always had infrastructure such as the obvious, employee assistance programs, yes, mental health champs, which I touched on. We have a whole plethora of resources, from meditation apps through to CBT, it goes on. But, we had to really get under the skin of our people to say, you now need to be asking this question more than ever. And what surprised us quite a lot was that actually our EAP numbers went down in March, April last year. I expected them to go up. But that's because everybody was on video, everybody was doing these calls, and everybody was saying, are you okay? How are you? And as you said earlier on, Rachel, people were answering it for the first time. So suddenly all of these manager team colleague conversations were suddenly an hour and a half long. And actually our line managers were taking a lot of it on themselves. Now, some of them would have been in situations where they had young children at home. Some of them might be living in a floor 6 flat in London by themselves with no outdoor space. So suddenly we were kind of like, oh crikey, how do we help everybody here? This isn't just about the new consultant talking to their line manager. This is, how do line managers support one another? How do we support our directors? How do we support our MDs? Because I think what the last 12 months, 15 months has shown us is nobody's exempt from this. And I think it has really helped everybody go, you never know when it might get you. And never be hard on yourself if you're having a tough time. The help is there. Help them access it, of course, and signpost and support. But try as much as possible to constantly be talking about it. And, whilst we've had all these resources for a long time, people still sometimes don't know where to go. And part of me sits there going, how can you not know? It goes out in every piece of communication and we shout about it from the rooftops, but I get it. Until you need it, it doesn't sink in all those other times that the comms have gone out. And so we need to just make sure that everybody is comfortable with it. So I suppose some of the things we've done is listen to our people. So when they needed help on homeschooling in lockdown 1, because everybody had their kids at home, it was like, right, how do we manage this? And I remember doing another session back in lockdown 3, this most recent one in January, and it was nothing more than a therapy session. I basically just put everybody on a call and everybody just went, oh my God, how are you managing this? Oh no, what are you doing there? it had no structure whatsoever. Any structure I had planned went totally out the window within the first minute. But that's what everybody needed. Everybody just needed a release. They needed to hear that their colleagues were going through the same thing. We shared ideas, and it was just a bit of a, okay, thank goodness. So I think sometimes there doesn't need to be an outcome. There doesn't need to be, this is what you do next. Sometimes it just needs to be that you're heard. And the business were brilliant. The business didn't put too much pressure on people. You know, clearly the recruitment industry wasn't booming last year. You know, it was like, just do what you can when you can. We will get through this together, and we'll all still be here when we come out the other side. And that's what will lead to a more prosperous 2021, well, hopefully. So that was kind of some of the earlier stuff. And then I think, you know, you can never ignore all of the contributing factors. So I did find it quite surprising, the poll saying actually it's family and friend. But I think that's because we're asking now. I think it would have been very different if we were asking a year ago. And people have without doubt gone through a whole change in who they're worried about, whether it's themselves, whether it's their kids, whether it's their mum and dad, you know. And I think over time, we've all gone through periods. I mean, I have seen some very dear friends of mine really have tough times, people I wouldn't have expected. And that has thrown me a little bit, because you kind of go, crikey, yeah, actually, if I'd have thought of anybody who would weather this storm, I had you down as that person, but actually you never know who it's going to impact. And I think we all need to be very kind and very mindful of one another. So some of the things we've done that I would say we've seen that have really helped is, one, giving people permission to be away from their desk and be active. So, you know, as a business, we're a fairly active bunch anyway. You should see our company Strava group. I mean, it is just relentless, all in a good way. And particularly when we went into the mini lockdown back in November, we had a big thing from our UK MD saying, look, hours of daylight are shorter. You know, you don't have to do your exercise before work or at the end of the day. He goes, I am more than happy for you to take your breaks in the hours of daylight, so that you get out in the, okay, it wasn't sunshine necessarily, but you get out when it's daylight and you take a break. We've been very, very mindful of burnout. We know people are working longer because it's harder to have that hard stop and have that breakaway. So we've done a lot around permission. We've done a lot around different activities to break it up. But what we saw an enormous shift was March specifically, because our company charity is a small spinal injury charity called Backup. Our CEO had a spinal injury and is in a wheelchair. So we support Backup, and they do this thing called the Spinal Circuit Challenge. And that was for the whole month of March, which was run, walk, skip, wheel, cycle, push, whatever. As many miles as you can across the month of March, and raise money for Backup. Well, Page Group took this on, I mean, and we seriously took this on. It was amazing how many people got involved. There were people who, like, crikey, I haven't run a kilometre in 6 years, suddenly, you know, running half marathons and so on, but it meant people could take breaks, and they knew they were doing it for a really good reason. And I spoke to my UK MD about it. I said, oh, what was productivity like for March? And he said, it has been one of the most productive months we've ever had. And we are running on a lower headcount than we have done. Okay, let's be very sensible about it. The vaccine was rolled out, schools went back, you know, there was an economic, built start to the recovery. So it's not exclusively around people getting away from their screens, but it did help people to work smarter, not longer and not harder. And we know that the endorphins you get from going for a quick run around the block or whatever really, really, really helps with productivity. And I think we pushed it as a get out in the fresh air. It will help you physically, which helps you mentally, which helps your productivity, which helps your energy levels, so we know that it all plays into everything. And it was astonishing. I mean, we all absolutely loved it. Couple of calf strains, groin strains, you know, and all that kind of thing as well. But it was absolutely brilliant. And another thing we've done, and this was launched as part of our Comms for Mental Health Awareness Week this week, is we have started to give people mental wellness days off. So time specifically to just reset the clock, take some time out. It isn't necessarily about you getting out into nature, albeit I know that's the theme for this year. Sometimes it's about actually just calling a friend, or sitting and watching a film, or just going, do you know what, today I'm just going to give in to myself and just let myself be. And I think, you know, we have to be mindful of what people have experienced over this 12 months. I mean, my husband lost both of his parents just in these last 3 months. And that's a very, very real, you know, story for a lot of people. You know, we've all suffered bereavement. And when I remember you and I talking about this when we initially met before doing this, sometimes even it's not bereavement of people, is it? It's bereavement of the life we had and how things have been. And this is why it affects people so differently. And we can never, ever assume that just because people have been okay up to now, or that it's been a bit more kind of scientific in regards to why people have had ups and downs. Now it could be triggered by anything or anyone, or just a feeling like, actually today's tough. So I think we need to now be mindful, and I'm conscious I'm going to try and pick this back up again now, like Gwen did. I've got to think about my ending being on a high. But, you know, I think the other thing that we now need to consider is all the people we've brought onto the business during lockdown haven't been into an office yet, haven't done the commute, haven't had the orientation around an office, haven't had the experience of sitting down with their team colleagues. Yes, they might have done it virtually. Well, what's that doing to their kind of apprehension, anxiety, you know, that build up? And I think we've got to recognise that it is going to be in so many different areas now. I mean, I've been in the office twice in 15 months. Quite enjoying my home office, gotta say. The yellow is really, you know,
yes, very
really makes me smile.
background.
Yeah, my oxygen for my plant. So I'm saying, okay. But it's actually, oh gosh, I've got to factor in, yeah, commutes and stuff again. And oh, well, actually, then when do I run with my dog in the morning? Because I won't be able to do that at the same time. And oh, that means breakfast club again for the kids. And suddenly it's like, oh, suddenly all these things I've got to juggle again. But I think my message is this: it's like, make no assumptions, you know. And we had to say this a lot to our people. The resources are there to help you. You know, we've spent a lot of money as an organisation making sure we have private medical, you know, an employee assistance programme, that you can have all these discounts and free access to things. It's like, use them, please use them, because, you know, you need to find what works for you. It's different for everybody. But, you know, it is a business's duty of care and interest and valuing of their employee base to support you as much as possible. So do tap into it and never be afraid of asking for help.
Thank you, Sherry. So Janet, we're coming to you next. And I first came across Janet because I read an article in the Times about a lady with the job title Director of Happiness. I was like, instantly sitting in my bed on a Sunday morning, I looked you up on LinkedIn. I mean, you've already started to tell us a little bit about what your job entails, but I'd like to ask you, what practical advice could you share, especially for anyone listening, any organisations who really want to support employee well-being? They don't have a dedicated Director of Happiness. They have, you know, limited budgets. And how can we facilitate an environment where people, because this is what you're doing all day, Janet, really open up and share when they're struggling with their mental health? That's a question that's come through on the chat as well. So you have like these well-being sessions like Sherry referred to, or not well-being sessions, but an opportunity to talk, and then people are still not really opening up. So can you give us some practical advice?
Of course. I mean, we're very lucky, as you say, that in my particular role, I can spend 95% of my time going up and down the country, talking to colleagues, being very open. But first and foremost, in any business, whether you've got finances, budget, whether you haven't, you've got to look at whether you've got trust and kindness and openness, because that's the biggest failing. And you'll never get people talking about mental health if you haven't got trust, kindness and openness within your business. So I think working on that and getting to that stage where people don't feel afraid, because the biggest thing is the stigma that comes with, I call it mental well-being. People go, mental health, oh, I can't talk about it, I'm afraid because you'll judge me. And we've worked really hard to get people to see past that we're not here to judge, we're actually here to support, so they can be the best that they can possibly be. Any business, even without any cost, has got somebody in there who will be good at communicating. When we went into lockdown, we had what, a week, didn't we? We all knew we were going into lockdown. We basically threw together a small group of people, and we called ourselves a wellbeing group. That's what we did. We created an email and we sent information out to say, we're here for you. We want to guide you. We won't have all the answers. We don't know a lot about COVID. Tell us your problems. Ask us anything you want and we'll help you. So some of the questions came back were, I've got no food. I've got no money. So we'd guide them to food banks. So we spent all that time, week in, week out, just doing stuff like that. It didn't cost money. It wasn't a big fancy thing, but they knew that if they had a problem, it could be things like, I can't get in to see my GP. They're too busy. What shall I do next? I can't pay my rent. What do I say to my landlord? These are all very basic things, but if you haven't got that communication, it's not going to work. Okay, so every week throughout the whole of the pandemic, we sent an email out that talked about children, other family members, how to get support for everybody, animals, getting outside, exercising, like we talked about before. Absolutely everything, fresh air, your mental well-being, sleep, how to have a drink without drinking too much alcohol, how not to smoke too much if you do smoke, you know, and we did that every week without fail to every one of our colleagues. And we were able to do that just by using payroll email addresses. Now, some of our colleagues will have received their email and deleted it because they didn't need it. But all you need is that one person who reaches out, and it works so effectively. And the other way to do it is, again, we're really good. We're lucky with James Timpson. Every week, without fail, he did a WhatsApp video, and it was 3 minutes long. Okay, he did his WhatsApp video, sent it to me, and then I sent it out to all our directors, and we scaled it right through the business. So from James doing his video once a week, it took about 20 minutes to cascade it down to 4,000 colleagues. And what he talked about on the video was just how things were. He asked everybody how they were feeling, but because it came from the top, it made a massive difference because everyone looked forward to hearing what he was going to say next. And it wasn't all fabulous news, but he was positive, and they could see how hard he was working to keep us all alive. And that made a massive difference, and that created an even better culture, so much so that he's still doing it now every week. And if his video is a bit late, everybody's getting in touch with me to ask me where it is because they're excited to know what's next. And that is how we share. We will overshare just to reach a percentage of people. And I think in some businesses, people are afraid of oversharing. We've got nothing to hide. We want to tell people as much as we can possibly tell them to make them feel better. This weekend, I sent another email out which just talked about Mental Wellbeing Awareness Week, just to remind people of the positive stuff, because some of it is brilliant. When you look at the pandemic, we've all learned to be so resilient, and I'm amazed at how good and how strong we all are. Yeah? So it's about, let's celebrate the fact that we are strong and that we are really good, we are resilient. We're all better than we think we are, let's celebrate. But the flip side of that is, but if you've got any issues at all, please, please, please feel free to contact me. And you know, from the one this weekend, I've had quite a few people contact me to say, I just want to talk to someone. And I don't want to talk to my wife because she's there all the time. I don't want to talk to my manager because he or she knows me too well. I'd rather talk to you. So I think communication, it doesn't cost anything to communicate. People love to communicate. So I think if businesses could get to that point where the colleagues feel safe and they can say what they want and they won't feel like somebody's going to judge them, I think it make a really massive difference to everybody. But it is about trust, kindness and openness. Get that key right, I think you can do the rest.
And I think one thing that you said, and I know, you know, we work so much around mental health and well-being with companies, and people are scared to start that conversation in case they say the wrong thing or they give the wrong advice. And I keep saying you don't need to have the answers.
No.
All you're doing is creating that space where someone can talk.
Yes.
And it might be signposting them. Like, you don't have to be a mental health first aider or a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist. It's just the experience of talking. That is what psychotherapists do. They enable you to get those thoughts out of your head and articulate them. And that's the first step to kind of managing when you know you're facing struggles.
And I think that is the key. And when a person does speak to you, you've got to be able, hand on heart, to say, if it's confidential, it's confidential. And I would urge people to make sure that if somebody does talk to them and says, look, this is really confidential, please don't, then you can't share it, unless we're talking about life or death or danger to somebody. But if somebody's trusted you enough to say something in confidence, privately, about their life away from work, whatever, you've got to be able to hold on to that, but also be able to switch off from it and look after your own mental well-being. Yeah. So you could have days where you've had lots of it all day long. You can't then go to bed at night thinking, oh my goodness, I've got to do this. That person's struggling, that person's suffering. You've got to be kind to yourself as well.
Yeah.
Because you're just as important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really about just learning to listen. You don't even need an answer. You're just listening.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janet. That's some really practical advice. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
So, Elliot, over to you. And I wanted to ask you about your experience of obviously you're giving us a male perspective, and you've got this community of dads that you're in touch with and you work with. So have you found that over the course of the pandemic, have you seen a change in the perception of mental health? Do you think men are more willing to talk? I mean, I know I do a lot of work just with dads, and I know that the times that they talk, I mean, it's a bit stereotypical, but if they're going to the pub or they're going to a football match, or they're actually meeting up and doing an activity. So what happens to men when, do they openly communicate and pick up the phone to a friend in the same way that they would talk if they were like physically together doing something? And I know that your upcoming book, Dad, which is incredibly exciting, was intended as a vehicle to really give dads a voice and share some stories that maybe we've never heard before. So I just wanted to kind of get your perspective and your personal reflections.
Yeah, thanks. This has been an amazing panel. I've been jotting down notes as you've all been speaking.
Yeah,
and
me
saying
too.
some amazing things. And I think so I want to start with a bit of a story actually before I answer your questions, Rachel. So, you know, I work with a lot of organizations and parenting networks to help them engage men and dads to be engaged fathers. And I'm very comfortable talking about parental leave and flexible working and policy, and I'm a champion of equal parenting. That's my comfort zone. I could do that all day. But when Rachel asked me to talk about mental health on LinkedIn, I actually went back to her and I said, are you sure I'm the right person? I'm not a mental health expert. Like, I wouldn't know what to say. And then Rachel said, wait a minute, isn't your organization all about that? Isn't it about supporting men and mental health and well-being? And I said, yeah, you're right. Actually, I'll come on the panel. and I think that in itself, you know, me thinking about whether I was qualified to be on a panel around mental health is probably in itself a representation, an example of how men don't actually talk about mental health themselves.
Yeah.
Especially the people, you know, especially people that do it themselves. You know, I don't talk about mental health directly with people, but all our work is supporting men in their well-being. But then I thought about it and I thought, actually, what story do I have to tell around mental health, around dads, around COVID and organizations? And I thought about it and I thought, actually, I do have some stuff to say. And what people don't know around parenting is that 1 in 5 mums will experience some sort of mental health challenges in their first year. But the even lesser known stat is that 1 in 10 dads will also experience some kind of mental health problems in their first year. The pressures of new fatherhood, a lot of issues around finance, lack of sleep, a loss of identity, all contribute to that. And although it's still early days, there is lots of anecdotal evidence that shows that COVID-19 and the pandemic has resulted in exacerbated those mental health challenges too. And when we're looking at new dads, what we normally see is a few mental health challenges. Depression, paternal depression is number one. Fathers are less likely to seek help, and when they do, they kind of talk about hopelessness or guilt or not feeling good enough and worry that they're not going to be a good enough father. And suicide is a big one. And when a father has PND, studies have shown that they're more likely, 5% more likely to commit suicide. So we need to think about that seriously. Suicide is the biggest killer of men under 50. And post-traumatic stress disorder is massive as well. It's an anxiety disorder, usually comes on from witnessing a traumatic birth. And thinking about my story and the reason why it was so ridiculous, why I didn't think I was qualified to be on this panel, is that when I talk about PTSD, I actually experienced that myself. So when my daughter was born, it was a very traumatic experience. She was very ill. She wasn't breathing. They had to resuscitate her when she was born. We spent 2 weeks in NICU. And that was a roller coaster of emotions. Some of the toughest parts of my life was in that hospital. And by the end of the 2 weeks, we thought it was okay. Like the infection was going up and down. We got to the point where we thought it was going to be all good. And then she developed a bump on the back of her head, and we had to take her for an emergency MRI scan. So some of the really deepest moments of my life, and luckily she's okay now. And she's a thriving 5-year-old. But for me, it was going back into work. A lot of my 2 weeks parental leave was taken up in that period. So I had a few days back at home, and I was back at work. And that was tough. And that kind of really resulted in me having symptoms of PTSD and flashbacks and nightmares and loss of confidence and motivation and energy and feeling really emotional, just random times sitting on the train going home, for example. And when I reflect on that now, what I think about is that in that period, the only person I really spoke to was my wife. My work colleagues didn't have a clue. My friends and my family, they didn't have a clue at all. They didn't tell them about it. And it really kind of hits home that as human beings, we're really quite good at not showing how we feel sometimes and not showing our emotions. And, when we look at that stat, that 1 in 5 mums and 1 in 10 dads will have PND, we don't see that physically. We meet parents and we don't always see that. We see the face, which is the happy pictures on Instagram, or it's the humorous banter in meetings, whatever it is. We don't see the human behind. And I did that myself. I was very good at putting a brave face on at work and at home. And that's what we're trying to do. Through our book, Dad, we're really trying to change that. We're trying to create spaces and make it okay and acceptable and encouraged for men to tell their stories. And the book is something that I am so excited by. Like, it's my life's work. It's outside of being a husband and a dad, of course, it is the one thing I'm the most proud of I've ever done in my life. We've got 20 dads talking so openly and honestly about their fatherhood experiences, from widowhood to raising a child with autism, to raising a mixed race child, to shared parental leave, to co-parenting. And we've got Mark Williams, who shared his story about PND, and he speaks about suffering in silence and the devastating effects that PND had on his life and how he put a brave face on at work. And then there's Ian, who had multiple suicide attempts after a relationship breakdown, and he again talks about going to work and putting a brave face on as well. And what Dad, the book, does is it highlights these stories and serves to illustrate the hidden mental health issues that many of us will suffer from. It's a groundbreaking book. It's a movement. Never before have so many men come together. And the call to action for the book is more conversations, open conversations between husbands and wives, dads and children, and in the workplace between colleagues. And that's what I really want the book to do, is to move forward those conversations about fatherhood, about masculinity, mental health, and gender equality as well. And I think through COVID, what we've seen is that the stigma around mental health has lessened a lot. I have had some amazing conversations. I think, we've all, as you've all said, we've all shared a collective trauma over the last year. And I think every one of us has been stressed and anxious at some point in the last year. It's only natural. We've been through an unprecedented global pandemic. And as we now ease into some kind of new way of working, hybrid working, I think it is really important. Obviously, we have to support everybody, but I'm going to touch on a few things here, specifically around men and specifically around dads. And this is kind of from my work in supporting organizations and from my community in Music Football Fatherhood as well. So the first thing is, if you have a parenting network, to do targeted sessions towards dads. The research shows that men are more likely to engage with services if they know it is specifically for them, if the language is for them as well. So if you have a parenting network, do sessions for dads, get people in that can talk to dads in there, create spaces to hear and listen to them. Where men especially are very, very good at putting a brave face on things. So creating spaces where you can hear them, I think, is really important. I think secondly is around policies. So a lot of you will be designing kind of hybrid working policies. What does that look like? Just making sure that you're in your language, and you're specifically making sure you are also considering dads in those policies too, and really talking to them explicitly when you're communicating about those policies. And when we're thinking about parents and the challenges they're going to have, really make sure you're engaging and including dads in that narrative, and those policies are important. And I think the third thing is it's a great time now to review your parental leave policies. So you may have seen Monzo recently have given paid parental leave to people who have suffered baby loss and miscarriage and stillbirth. And Aviva do great work. They have equal pay 6 months for each parent after they are a new parent, and Vodafone are really leading the way as well. And I think this is something that maybe 5-10 years ago it was a nice to have, but this is the future. A lot of, especially the younger generation of parents and dads, are expecting longer than 2 weeks parental leave. They're expecting to work flexibly. They're expecting to be a fully involved parent. And the organizations that are kind of going now will be the ones that prosper in the future as well. But I also want to leave you with, the reflecting on, I think what we've all said is that now is a really good time for deeper conversations. It's a really good time to get people together, to hear people. I've noticed in the last year that everyone's a lot more up for talking, being a lot more vulnerable. For me in this book, I've shared my story in this book that I haven't really spoken about. This is the first time I think I've spoken about it publicly on a panel. And I think the last year has allowed me that, because the conversations that I've had have been reciprocated. People are really, really more vulnerable now. They're in that space where we've been through a collective experience, and we're okay to talk about it now. So I think it's a great time to take that opportunity to get people together, to listen, to hear people. And I really think that, we can make a success over the next 6 months, over the next year, and hopefully the new normal will be better than the previous normal. So thank you for having me. I'm really glad I stepped out of my comfort zone, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah. How on earth you thought you can't talk about mental health? I just you sometimes need someone to just turn the light on.
Exactly.
But it is, what you said, it is so, I think like the next few months, we've got this very precious window, because literally as soon as we go back to work physically, it might just take a matter of weeks before we're right, like elastic band, right back to where we were. And we've got to hold on to like making proper changes so that it's not the old way. I just wanted to share one more thing that I found really helpful that I read about a few days ago, and then we're going to open it out to questions. So with mental health, we normally think about it on a spectrum, kind of between depression at one end, thriving at the other. And I read this article that used the term languishing, which is this idea that we might not have, the symptoms of mental illness, but we're also not feeling great. And languishing is a bit like, lacking motivation and focus. We get on with our usual routine, but we're not getting a sense of joy or satisfaction out of it, and just kind of going through the motions. And for me, just that word helped describe what I think perhaps a lot of people are experiencing at the moment. So we've got a number of questions. This is what one kind of gave to Elliot. How do we, and it will apply to other people, how do we encourage, here it says the civil service, to be employee first organisations? I mean, I have to say, I'm working extensively with the Department for Work and Pensions and the Department of Transport, and I think what they've put in place has actually been amazing. But not only for civil service, how do we create this culture of employee first organisations? I don't know who wants to.
So I'll have a go. I think so. The civil service is an interesting place. There's lots of different departments, and you would think there is alignment, but every department has a lot of their own decisions and directions. So I think, I agree with Rachel. I think there has been some really good practice. I think around flexible working over the last year has been brilliant. I think there's been a heightened awareness of the impact of policy on the public. Around the furlough scheme and stuff like that, which has been really, really good. But I think it kind of with a lot of things around diversity and inclusion and mental health and well-being, it is around a senior leadership team, and it is around how much they are going to role model, how much they are going to lead the way, and what culture they set for the people in their teams. So I think like what Janet was saying in terms of, if you have a perm sec, a DG who can be vulnerable and open and really set the example, that has an amazing effect on the rest of us, because we feel like that is now a safe space. That's the norm. That's what we should do. So what I've been doing in the Treasury is exactly that, is working with the senior leaders and trying to get them to be more open and share more of their experiences. A lot of the time it's very easy to think like we have to, as leaders, kind of always be perfect, always be on, always be 100%, and that's just not the reality. Behind the scenes we are also struggling too. So being vulnerable about that, I think, is the first step for me.
Okay, anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've seen start to happen in different organizations, and it's kind of built an awareness since I've done this degree in occupational psychology, is bringing well-being and diversity and inclusion and equity programs into actually the KPIs of the organization. So as you're setting up these goals for people for the year, how can we bring that language into the KPIs of our line managers, our people managers, and the individuals, that they're able to access and make that actually a part of how they're able to kind of assess in the performance management process, how is my well-being and how is your well-being being supported? And from the data that's coming from the organizations that are making this part of like, no, this is our business as usual, this is how we do things. It's amazing how just putting that small couple of lines here and there has made people be like, oh, this actually does matter, because we're tracking this metric, we're making sure that this is a priority.
Okay. There's been a lot, I've done a lot of work around this kind of integration between your personal life and work, because we've all been doing it in the same place. And there is a question about what advice would you give to transition your mind in and out of work, especially when it's in the same physical space. So anyone got any? I mean, I don't want to speak because I could answer that for 2 hours. But anyone else got ideas from perhaps those of you who are really in corporates all day long, like not in, but working them? Any thoughts?
I don't mind jumping in. I think so what we kind of understood from our people is that people were effectively giving themselves a commute in some way, shape or form. And sometimes that was walking the dog, right? I'm going to walk the dog between 7:30 and 8, because then at 8 o'clock when I get home, that's work. Or people were using exercise. It isn't always easy, and I think we had to really be on top of our people a little bit, because it was around that, oh gosh, well, if somebody calls me on Teams, I need to be there. What if I'm not there? And then it's like, oh, I was only making a cup of tea, and suddenly it's like, it's okay not to be there. It's okay not to answer the call. It's okay that you're doing something else. It's okay if you're putting the washing on. I mean, it's all okay. And we had to do quite a lot around that, but that was done very individually within teams, because that's not a national message. That is just actually being open and honest and having that intimacy with sort of in team calls and say, look, it's okay. But just trying, and this isn't always easy, but trying to see the people who aren't managing it very well and having direct conversations with them to say, look, I notice you're always sending me emails at 9:10 at night. You deserve to have time out. You deserve to finish your working day. And I know the lines have been very blurred. And it's also particularly difficult if your laptop is in your open plan kitchen diner or lounge, which is where you watch TV, feed your kids, whatever. There just isn't any boundaries, and that is really difficult. So then that is almost where you have to kind of take a little bit more control and say, okay, well, I am going to work 9 till 5:30, just as an example, and that's what I'm going to do. If I was in the office, when I come home, that's my personal time. So actually, how do I make that happen? It's not straightforward, but it's trying to find out what works best for people and just trying to look out for those who perhaps haven't really managed to clear it up for themselves.
Yeah, there's a really lovely question. It might be for Gwen, but anyone else can contribute. It says, is there a how are you feeling spectrum available that we can recommend, like a daily mental health check-in or personal assessment? Or I don't know, Janet, if you know of anything on that front, or maybe Gwen, you're the mental
You know, a
health
friend of
expert.
mine actually, a friend of mine and I have this thing that we do every once in a while, and he calls it the Bell Mercury scale. So and what that is so you have Bell, the I want adventure in the great wide somewhere, and then you have Freddie Mercury, I want to break free. And so we have to figure out where we are in the middle of this Bell Mercury scale. And it's sometimes it's about finding creative ways to say, like, how are you doing? I'm fine. We're all trained to say that. But what are we actually saying? How are you feeling? Where are you at is a question that I like to ask people, because they're like, oh, where am I at? That's my old Southern, probably very poor grammar, but where are you at right now? Kind of lets people have a check-in and address themselves. Even, thumbs up, how far up on the thumbs up scale are you? Finding creative ways that people engage. It doesn't have to be something like, we have this app that has the top 15 feelings that people fear, and you must choose one of those. It can just be a general, a general thumbs up scale, but it needs to be something that people are willing to engage with, and it needs to be something where people feel, as Janet was saying, like there's a trust there and there's a safety there to be able to say, actually, I'm on the Mercury side today, and I just want to break free and just go running in the fields with my dog or something, because I'm tired and I'm stressed, or I'm feeling Bell and I'm in flow and I'm ready to get going today. It's good to have that information and know that those feelings are all transitory, because feelings are transitory by nature, but also that they're all important. So we're not always wanting to be, you always have to be at Bell, because you can't sustain that. But we also don't want you to have to it doesn't have to be a binary between Bell and Mercury. You can be in the middle, and that's okay too.
Do you know, the poll result is really, really interesting. And I would say going forward, this is where we should try to focus as organisations. But when we ask the question, who do you go to? Who do you turn to if you feel you need support? Only 3% are saying their colleagues. It's 11 on the dot. That is a great way to sum it up. Like, how can we as organisations try to change that culture? To be continued.
We need to communicate more. As individuals and as business leaders, we've got to communicate more and make the time. If that means we've got to work smarter in order to have more time to help others, then that's what we need to do. Not to just work longer and longer. There's only 24 hours in a day, but we've got to give people time, and they've got to believe that we're giving them that time, because if they don't believe it, it's not going to work.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Elliot, you're going to say something. I just know that some of our panelists have to rush off, and I really, really appreciate your time. Yeah, Sherry, I know you've got to go, but Elliot, Sherry, even if you need to go, thank you. Do you want to say your last bit?
I'll be super quick. I was going to say, just building on Janet's point around relationships, I think if we're asking and we're hoping that colleagues are going to speak to other colleagues, that has to be built on a good relationship first. I'm not going to reach out to my colleague that I haven't built a solid relationship of trust with. I'm just not going to do that just because they're my colleague. It has to be a natural thing that I'm going to want to do. And so I think it's about, first and foremost, how do we build good relationships between people? And I think that means role modeling, like we have said. I think that means giving people the space to do that. Like looking at their work. If they've got loads of work on all the time, they're not going to have the ability to actually build those relationships. So, within the teams and with my team, we'll have weekly sessions where we just chat with each other. I just find out about your dog or your kid's school, whatever it is, and we take that time to get to know each other properly. And I think when we do that and we form good relationships, naturally people will go to their colleagues for support and help. But it has to start with relationship building first and foremost, I think.
Okay. Anyone desperate to say one last thing?
Yeah, I just to add on to that, just one, I've always got to say one more thing, but the idea of having a workplace ally is something that I really brought out of neurodivergent resources, where just having one person that you can check in with, having that one person, you don't have to check in with the whole team or with your manager or with everybody that's there, but just knowing that there's one person that can see you for who you are and say, hey, how you doing, really? or that you can see with them and that you can trust. Sometimes that's the first place to start, to find that one workplace ally to feel secure with.
Can I just say one last thing, and then we go. Once you've built that, the person that's talking has to understand that their love for who they are, that they're not perfect, because none of us are perfect. You want that person to think, you know what, Gwen actually accepts me for who I am, even though I've got failings, even though I've got weaknesses and strengths. Gwen accepts me for who I am. And I think if you've got that in the workplace, it will work.
Well, thank you so much. I'll share with you the chat, because there's so much amazing material in there. I'm just not able to talk and read and concentrate on what you're saying at the same time. But thank you everyone for your level of interaction. And of course, if anything resonated, or if you need any other support for your organisation, we can signpost you. Or of course, you know, this is what Educating Matters does all day long. It's all about trying to support employee well-being. So thank you everyone, and enjoy. Is it next week that we're even easing more out of something? I don't know. Restaurants opening? I've lost. I mean,
It's
I know
the 17th. It's on my calendar.
That is next Monday, isn't it?
Yeah.
We just need the weather to improve, and then we're all going to feel a little bit better. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you really to everyone that joined our audience. Thank you.
Bye.
See you.